Welcome witches to today's video. We're going to go over the best books I have read so far in the first half of 2025. I'm going to break this down into genres of my favorites versus like top, second, third, fourth, etc. I will in the corner put the number of books I've read in that genre just to give some context when I'm picking out books. Did I have one to pick from? Did I have 4 to pick from? Did I have 10 to pick from? Etc. I'll also put the spread of genres that I've read for the year just to reference the quantity and genres that I read. The first category that we're going to talk about is biography, memoirs, and my favorite is hands down Men Have Called Her Crazy by Anna Marie Tendler. I have really been loving memoirs this year, and all of them I've loved. Spoiler alert for my least favorites of 2025, I have none in biography, memoir. I have enjoyed them all. The reason that I put this as number one is, one, I didn't know who Anna Marie Tendler was before this. 2, I really picked it up because I thought the title was interesting, and then I read the synopsis and found it interesting. I had no idea how, this is point 3, I had no idea how much I was going to get invested in her story. I was Googling to learn more about her. I wanted to see interviews. I wanted to understand more about her, which I did. And I think that there is some stuff in NDAs that has probably kept some juicier tidbits, which after reading it makes sense. I felt like I didn't understand. She had a husband, but we never talked about him. I kept feeling like I was missing something. And so that was kind of explained. However, I really thought this was a captivating story. I thought she did a great job with telling her story, keeping it entertaining, her writing style, everything. I think she did a fantastic job, and I would definitely recommend. She did have some suicidal ideation. Do keep that in the back of your mind. This is her time in an inpatient treatment therapy to help her get over some of her issues. And she definitely has a dislike of men, which is fair. You understand more of that story. I just think this was absolutely very well done. And this would be my favorite of biography memoir of 2025 so far. The next category is going to be fantasy, and I have to go with Size by Neil Shusterman. This is actually a trilogy / there's like a 3.5. It's called the Arc of Size series. I loved every single one of those books. I am obsessed with this book. This hands down has to be my favorite fantasy. This is a world of utopia, and there is the Thunderhead, who's like AI. It makes sure everybody's happy. Everything's like perfect in the world. And then since they've defeated death, so people don't die, but they have Size, who are trained to then carry out essentially population control. They are the ones who administer death, if you will. And in that, we are following Citra and Rowan, who stood up to a particular scythe. And because of that, they are now Scythe Apprentice. And we are following their journey in the first book to become Scythe. We're finding out more about how corrupt the Scythe world is. And I just think that the world building's done fantastically in this book. It builds continuously on in the story, but it all is cohesive. It never feels dull. The characters are well-rounded. Character development's really great. I just think he did a fantastic job with this, and I would highly recommend. I do want to just mention a reread, because I have done a little bit of rereading, but Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. And had you asked me at the beginning of year, and I think I've even referenced it in videos this year, of if it was between Under the Whispering Door and The House in the Cerulean Sea, which would be my favorite, and I would have said The House in the Cerulean Sea. I reread both this year, and there's something that's bringing me back to Under the Whispering Door, and I think it's the storyline of Wallace is this man who doesn't really make a statement in the world. His life is very singular, closed off. It's not necessarily exciting, but he awakens at his funeral, and nobody can see him, and he finds out, oh, he's died, and he goes to this tea shop to help him pass over. But despite the fact that this man's life seemed boring and not worth anything, and like didn't have all this family to hold on to, he still wants to get back to it. And this is where he's really learning to live and relationships. And I Just really like the message behind the book. I really like the character development, the character relationships. I just think it was really well done. And I think the reason it's resonating with me is just the storyline. I'm also feeling a little scattered and like my thoughts aren't making a lot of sense. So I apologize for that and bear with me. I don't know what it is. The only fiction that is a favorite actually ends up having to be reread, but My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is about a young girl named Vanessa who is at a boarding school in Maine, and she gets groomed by her teacher at 15 and develops this relationship. She doesn't think that she's a victim. Later on, she's an adult. Another victim comes out and they're asking her to stand up and say her story. And she's saying, I'm not a victim. I'm not equivalent to this. Although it's making her question a lot of what her relationship with this particular teacher was. What I think the author does really well with this story is showing how somebody at that age can sadly easily be groomed by somebody older to think that they want it. It was their choice and they were not a victim. And you see how that's getting twisted. It also shows the lasting effects it has on relationships that she builds later on, her kind of mental stability with relationships as she gets older, and just how negative of an impact it has on her years and years later after it's done. And I think that it's written really well and that conversation is done really well. I think it's a really well executed story for kind of the sensitive subject that it touches. The best historical fiction I read would be The Yellow Wife by Sadika Johnson. This was a really powerful story. Situation, places, and things that the main character Phoebe had to deal with, and the amount of strength that she shines through in this story, despite those, is amazing. This is about a woman who's born on a plantation. This is during the time of the slaves. Phoebe ends up getting sold off from the plantation she was born on when she thought she was going to be free to the most notorious, it's called the Devil's Half Acre of slave buying trading. He ends up becoming the master's like woman. And so she has to put up with a lot. She has to be really strong despite the terrible situation that she's in, the terrible things that she sees. Some of this can be very graphic and it is heart-wrenching, but I think that it was such a well done book, in my opinion. Characters are very well developed, and just the strength of Phoebe. Phoebe was such an inspiring character. And so I just think it was a really well done book and I would recommend it. Technically, I would recommend any of these books because this is my best of. Again, brain not working. We're chugging along today. Now I gotta go let the dog in. My favorite horror would be Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. This is following Celia, Allie, and Maggie as they are stuck in classic book tropes. Like it says, getting lost in a story can be deadly. Celia wakes up in a classic murder mystery. Allie wakes up in a closed circle slasher in the middle of the woods after supposedly going on this trip for her birthday with her girlfriends. Their boyfriends end up coming. And then Maggie wakes up in a Hunger Game maze runner situation. She has a certain amount of time that she has to get out of this maze, but also survive others trying to get her. And at the end, it all comes together. The pacing of this was quick. It was fast paced. I really enjoyed it. I loved the fact that it really brought in all the classic tropes that you would love of each of these stories. It was really well executed. I really like Christine Henry's writing. I have nothing but good things to say about this. The next category is mystery, and that is going to be Listen for the Lie by Amy Tantera. I wouldn't say that this necessarily has anything particularly brilliant about it, except for what makes it my favorite and stand out in my mind is the main character. She has this very dark sense of humor. When people make comments about like murder or... Let's start with what this is about. This is about a girl, Lucy, who had a best friend named Savvy. One day she's coming out of the woods. She's covered in Savvy's blood. Savvy said she has no memory of what happened, and people aren't really sure. Did she do it? Did she not? She moves away. 5 years later, her grandma says, can you please come back for my birthday to this town? She hasn't been back since. She comes back, and there's also been this podcaster who wants to do a podcast story on Savvy's death. And he's also in town when Lucy's in town. The thing that makes this stand out for me is Lucy's character. Lucy makes a lot of kind of, I don't want to say inappropriate, but somebody will make a comment to the death and she'll be like, yeah, I did it. And just like these really offhanded, dark, humorous jokes related to the murder. And you're like, but you don't know that you didn't. I just think that the way that they wrote the main character is very different than most that you're going to see. There's just this really dry, dark sense of humor that she has. And I think that was really fun. I do love a good podcast element of stories and stories that are told partially through a podcast. So that also has it going for me because you do have like Lucy's point of view and then the point of view through the podcast, which I think was fun. So that would be my favorite for mystery. My favorite nonfiction is going to be Radium Girls by Kate Moore. I enjoy that they include photos of the girls. I think that that is a nice touch to the story because this is following the girls who painted radium dials or worked with radium back in World War I. Before that, they knew that radium was dangerous. These women worked with it. And then they started developing life-altering deadly side effects. And after continued research, starts to point to it's radium's fault. They're starting to work with lawyers and doctors, and the companies are getting experts to gaslight them and tell them, like, no, it's safe. And so they keep doing unsafe work activities at work, and more people get sick. And this is just a story about standing up for that, finding out that radium is not safe, putting in some safety measures around that and the effects that these women had. I think it was really interesting and worth the read. The next category is romance, which I'm going to go with Funny Story by Emily Henry. I really liked Daphne and Miles and their relationship. It was lighthearted. It truly started as a friendship with no, to me, ulterior motive and felt very authentic in its growth into becoming a couple. This is following Daphne, whose fiance Peter cheats on Daphne on his bachelor party with his best friend Petra, who he's like, Petra's just a friend, you don't have to worry about it. Turns out she did have to worry. Petra had a boyfriend named Miles. Daphne and Miles are both in this town. They don't really have anybody. So Daphne needs somewhere to go. She goes to stay at Miles' house in his spare room. And they build a friendship. They build a relationship. It was a humorous story in just the right spots. But I also enjoyed the fact that they didn't write the main character's exes blatantly as terrible. They really wrote it into the story in a way that you see it. You can understand their dynamics together in a relationship. So I think that the way that she wrote in the exes was also done really well. I think this was a fun, enjoyable book to read. The next category is thriller, and that's going to be The Girl from Widow Hills by Megan Miranda. I'm a big Megan Miranda fan. I think that she does a really good job of writing. This is following a girl named Arden/Olivia. Arden is a young girl. She ends up missing. Then they find her a few days later, clinging to a storm drain. Her mom writes a book. However, Arden doesn't want the fame, so she changes her name to Olivia, moves away. Then she starts sleepwalking again. She ends up over the dead body of somebody from her past life as Arden, and she's trying to figure out what's happening. I think that this is an interesting book. I don't think it's like out of this world. It's a pretty solid book. I didn't necessarily read any like out of this world thrillers. So take that with a grain of salt. I think the pacing in this was good. I think the storyline is a little bit different than what you're going to do. Then the past, you're not really sure if something's going on with her, why her past is coming back to haunt her, who's after her, was somebody after her that day, was it her sleepwalking? You don't know, and I think it's an enjoyable journey to go on. The next category is young adult. I'm going to give a shout out. I'm rereading all the Harry Potter series, so obviously Harry Potter, specifically the first one, has a lot of nostalgia for me, so I am just going to throw that out there. This is following Harry Potter as he's learning that he is actually a magical wizard, a very famous magical wizard. He gets invited to Hogwarts, and it's his first year at Hogwarts. He finds a sorcerer's stone, learns more about he who shall not be named, which is Voldemort. Now going with a new one would be The Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I really like this. This gives me a little bit of Coco vibes or Encanto, like a mix of those. This is following a young boy who wants to become a Bruja. However, due to the fact that he wasn't born male, they're saying he can't be a Bruja. He ends up summoning the spirit and now has to get the spirit back. and figure out, but the spirit's kind of a handful. This is perfect for YA. It has right dash of magic and inclusivity conversations and loving people for who they are, accepting people for who they are. I just think the message behind this is really good. This is getting a second coming, I think later this year or next year. So keep a lookout for that, but I would recommend. That is it for the best books we've read in the first half of 2025. I'm sorry if it seems a little scattered. I'm feeling a little scattered. I appreciate you watching, so thank you for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye, witches.